desperate to regain control of her life, a mental patient takes matters into her own hands despite her instability. In the dining room, Irma records the session with Janie and asks her to color the flowers on the paper so that none of them look the same. The patient says she knows the test was made for children, so the caretaker reminds her that even though it may seem easy for her now, it wasn't always and it probably won't be in the future. Eventually, Janie takes a colored pencil and fills in the petals. Later, Irma takes the patient's blood pressure as she consumes a smoothie. That evening, the woman lies on the couch with her eyes closed. As she describes what she sees in her mind, the caretaker writes everything she says in a notepad. Janie says she's standing on a beach, but she can't walk to the water because there's broken glass on the sand. So Irma tells her to place sand over the sharp objects to create a path toward the water and to raise her right hand once she's done so. Seconds later, the older woman sees the patient raise her right hand and she smiles. After the session, Irma takes Janie back to her room and tucks her in bed. The next day, the patient exhales a deep sigh after seeing the same coloring worksheet on the table, but she performs the task anyway. Later, when the caretaker sees Janie pulling on a loose thread on the couch, she taps the woman's shoulder and says she needs to clear her mind. The patient apologizes and points out that she stopped when called out. However, she knows that whatever the older woman says goes, so Janie performs a meditative pose outside, and Irma tells her to focus on balance because if she falls, she'll have to start over. While concentrating, the patient remembers a traumatic incident from the recent past where the distraught caretaker watches as two friends hold her back and she thrashes despite the blood on her hands and torso. The memory upsets Janie and she loses balance, so Irma wonders if she's alright. Later, the patient searches for earthworms in the woods around the house and places them in a jar. Then, she climbs up a tree and finds 3 eggs inside a nest. When she returns to the house, the older woman thinks she's dehydrated and forces her to drink more water than she'd like. The next day, Irma informs Janie that her father called earlier, and although he's decided to spend a couple more months in Japan, he and the caretaker thinks it's time she's allowed outside the house. Much to the woman's delight, the patient obediently ingests her medication and sits in a tub as the older woman shaves her legs and arms with a straight razor. She asks how long she is allowed outside on her own and what she's supposed to do. So Irma says they'll start in a few hours and that she's free to do whatever she wants. After the bath, the caretaker asks Janie who she sees in the mirror, and the woman says she sees herself. While driving around the city, the patient sees someone who looks like her drive past. Confused, she turns the car around and follows the vehicle, but when she catches up, she realizes it's someone else. She follows the woman, Savannah, watches as she enters her home, and then drives off. That evening, Janie scans the room to make sure she's alone, before slowly moving the glass off the counter until it falls and shatters on the floor. After hearing the noise, the caretaker appears, quickly clears the shards off the floor, and tells the patient to be more careful. The next day, Janie checks on the worms and looks up at the nest in the tree. Later, she drives back to Savannah's neighborhood, parks near the woman's house, and watches as she leaves. When she returns home, the caretaker points out that she's 1 hour and 17 minutes late. Irma says she didn't call to remind the patient because she'd like to treat her like an adult. Janie apologizes and promises to mind the time moving forward and to call if she's gonna be late. Then, the older woman asks how her first day on her own in the outside world went. That evening, the patient hears running water despite checking all the faucets, so she heads to Irma's room and flicks the light on and off until the older woman wakes up. The caretaker assures that it's probably running water in the pipes inside the large house which she just recently noticed. The next day, Janie follows Savannah on foot and observes as she hangs out with a friend at the park. Then, she enters the same cafe, sits a few tables away, and sees her greet a man with a kiss. Hours later, she continues watching the couple through the window from her car outside. That evening, she waits for the pair to arrive at the man's house before sneaking into the backyard. There, she peeps through the bedroom window and watches as they make love. Overwhelmed, Janie sits on the ground and drags her fingernails on the concrete. Seconds later, she runs back to her car and tries to calm herself down. The next day, Savannah knocks on the window and asks if Janie's okay. So the woman pretends she fell asleep while waiting for her friend whom she promised to drive to the airport. The woman introduces herself, so the stalker lies and says her name's Margot. When the patient returns home, she sees the disappointed caretaker in the living room holding a tuning fork. Janie tries to explain that she wanted to call but her phone ran out of battery. However, Irma reminds her that what she's about to do isn't a punishment but a consequence of her breaking the rules she put in place. So the patient lays down on the couch, obediently bites the rolled up washcloth, and visibly writhes in pain at the reverberating sound of the tuning fork. The next day, Irma states that everything she's doing is for the patient's good, especially since after Janie's mother died, she promised her father that she'd spend the rest of her life worrying about her. Later, the woman sneaks into Savannah's house when she finds the spare key under a flower pot. Inside, she rifles through the mail and places one envelope in her pocket. Then, she heads to the bedroom and lays on the sheets for a few minutes while gently caressing the soft fabric. Suddenly, Janie hears Savannah enter the house, so she quickly sneaks out through the back door. That evening, the patient finds the woman's number in the piece of mail she stole. Then, when Savannah answers the call, Janie uses a recorder to play the woman's voice back to her. The next day, while the patient lies by the pool, the 3 eggs fall off the nest and land beside her, revealing the underdeveloped chicks inside. That evening, she hears the running water again and follows it to the pool outside. As she gets on her hands and knees, she dives into the water, and Irma appears with a flashlight wondering why she is in the pool with her clothes on. The next morning, the frustrated Janie curses when she is unable to focus on her balancing exercise. The caretaker tries to calm her down, but all it does is further anger the patient. She disdainfully retorts that Irma's just a housekeeper, that she isn't her mother, and that she hates her. Then, the patient returns inside the house and starts trashing the living room. Just as she is about to throw a lamp to the floor, the caretaker reminds her that if she's being violent, she'll have no choice but to call the police. Eventually, Janie calms down and endures another session with a tuning fork. During the painful ordeal, the woman remembers the harrowing incident where a man took her into a dark alley and planned to take advantage of her. However, instead of fighting back, she unbuttoned her pants and the submissive action drove the man away. After the session, Irma slaps Janie and tells her to clean up the mess she made. The next day, the woman wipes the fogging off the bathroom mirror after a steamy shower. Suddenly, Savannah arrives, revealing that Janie's inside the woman's home. After seeing the handprint on the mirror, the homeowner calls the police to report a possible break-in. While the officer checks the space, Janie quietly hides on the balcony outside. That evening, the unhinged stalker sneaks back into the house, removes her shoes, and enters the bedroom. Then, she creepily leans over the unaware woman and watches her sleep. Unbeknownst to Janie, Irma followed her throughout the day and knows where she is. Later, she heads to Savannah's boyfriend's house, knocks on the door, and kisses the bewildered man. Despite the confusion, he plays along with Janie's advances, and soon they're making love in the bedroom. The woman looks over her shoulder and imagines herself peeping through the window. In the middle of the deed, Janie grabs a large geode from the bedside table and uses it to bash the man's head in. He tries to scream for help, but she continues bludgeoning his face until he perishes. Meanwhile, the caretaker installs the electric fences on the door frames for a dog shock collar. Then, she detaches the device from the regular strap and places it onto a lockable collar. Concurrently, Janie heads to a nightclub and dances in the crowd as if nothing happened. Later, when the patient lies down on her bed, the lights suddenly turn on and Irma jumps on her and swiftly secures the shock collar around her neck with a padlock. The older woman says Janie left her no choice but to treat her like a dog because she chose to trample on the same rules she agreed to. Then, the caretaker presses a remote to demonstrate the first 2 shock levels, and the woman begs her to stop. She explains that should the woman try to escape, she'll feel the level 3 shock when she passes the perimeters. Janie demands to speak to her father, but Irma says she must concentrate on her treatment so their progress from the past year doesn't go to waste. The caretaker asks where she was and who she was with, but when the patient lies, she reveals that she knows exactly where she went. Later, Irma orders Janie to take off all her clothes, and the patient closes her eyes and turns away as she anticipates the caretaker's physical exam to check if she's been chased. The next day, the older woman removes all the devices and their corresponding wires from the house and hides them away, in case the patient tries to contact the outside world. Desperate for freedom, she attempts to leave the house, but the electric shock incapacitates her. As Janie sobs on the dining table, Irma tries to lift her spirits with a cold drink, but she pushes the caretaker away. Later, the older woman holds up the shock collar remote to force the patient to take her medication. During her balancing exercise, Irma shocks Janie while she tries to meditate. To the woman's surprise, she realizes she's able to endure the pain with the proper concentration. That evening, the patient sneaks to the kitchen and rifles through the drawers until she finds a pair of scissors. Back in her room, she tries using one of the blades to cut through the collar. Suddenly, Irma enters and asks where she's hiding the tool she's using to remove the collar. So Janie grabs the scissors from under the pillow and points them at the caretaker. The older woman presses the remote, but the pain doesn't faze the patient. When Irma inches closer, Jamie sweeps the blade and slashes the caretaker's throat, ending her life. Then, she removes the remote and key from the lanyard around the lifeless woman's neck and uses it to unlock the collar. Later, the dazed Janie walks through the city and sits outside Savannah's door. The worried woman recognizes her and takes her inside the house to clean the blood off. After driving back to the house, Janie knocks Savannah out and drags her body inside. In the bedroom, the deranged patient ties the woman's hands and feet to make sure she doesn't escape. When the confused captive asks what's happening, Janie mockingly echoes her pleas. Then, she lies down next to the terrified woman and caresses her face. The next day, Janie wakes up and finds that Savannah is no longer next to her. Eventually, she sees the prisoner trying to open a side door to escape, so the deranged woman places the shock collar around her neck to subdue her. Later, the captor forces Savannah to ingest a smoothie, just like Irma used to do to her. That evening, Janie applies makeup on both of their faces and makes sure they're identical. The captive asks what she needs to do to appease the woman, but she refuses to answer and slaps her instead. Then, Janie grabs a knife from the kitchen and makes identical cuts on their lower lips. After smearing Savannah's lipstick, the captor steps away and presses the button on the remote, and the intense shock causes the bound woman to accidentally soil herself. Later, after cleaning up in the bath, the captive drops the towel to reveal her clothless body. She says she understands what Janie wants, implying that she believes the woman wishes to sleep with her. However, after they kiss, the furious captor pulls away and throws the clothes at her. Soon, Janie finds the videotapes of her sessions with Irma, some dating back to when she was a child, revealing that she's been under the caretaker's watchful eye for years. In one session, Irma instructed her to raise her right arm and hit her forehead against the wall repeatedly until she began to bleed. In her dream, Janie and Savannah are in the pool facing each other, reciting the same phrases in unison. The next day, the unhinged woman tells the captive that she blames herself for her mother's death because she died during childbirth. She adds that she sometimes wonders if she meant to take her mother's life. However, Janie now believes that she was meant to live because she had to be present for Savannah to find her. The woman says that even though the captor doesn't understand why she is currently in this situation, she knows that she is aware there is a similar void that exists inside her. Suddenly, the unhinged woman cries and confuses her identity between Janie and Margot. Then, she suffers a fit and seizes on the floor. Thinking this might be her only chance to escape, Savannah wriggles out of the binds and runs out of the house. Unfortunately, a level 3 shock incapacitates her when she tries to go through the gate. Minutes later, Janie sees the blood on the captor's head from the injury she suffered during the fall. Then, she drags the dazed woman back inside and slowly plunges the knife into her stomach. Janie stares at Savannah's face until her dying breaths and lovingly caresses her lifeless hand. Later, the woman imagines herself as a baby inside her mother's belly. Then, she steps into the bathtub and uses the straight razor on her wrists to take her own life.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.